How do epidemics become pandemics?
Pennsylvania declares war on pneumonia.
By mid-April, the disease had become indeed epidemic in both of these cities.
COVID-19 can be characterized as a pandemic.
A pandemic basically refers to an epidemic that has spread over several countries or continents, usually affecting a large number of people globally. Today, we'll be taking a trip down memory lane, giving you an insight into similar situations in history. Our journey begins with the Black Death, an event in 1347 that's commonly known as the Great Plague. This was the most devastating pandemic recorded in human history, resulting in the deaths of an estimated 75 to 200 million people in Eurasia. The Black Death is a result of a tiny bacteria known as Yersinia pestis. This bacteria is commonly transported in populations of fleas, who are then transported by rats and other ground rodents common in Asia. Merchant ships at the time were rife with rat infestations, and this was the most likely contributor to the disease going on a world tour. Believe it or not, the Black Death was never cured. Instead, it died out with almost half the population of the world. Those that survived had a gene that made their immune systems stronger against the disease. This means, as they procreated, they passed the gene on to our modern population. Later, in 1817, the first of 7 cholera pandemics would begin in India. Experts suggest that it originated from the Ganges River and went on to contaminate food, which became the mode in which it started to spread. This created a vicious cycle as the bacteria lived on in the feces of an infected person and spread through poorly treated sewage and water systems, which was the case for most of the world in 1817. The inability to contain this rapid movement caused the disease to quickly spread through most of Asia, resulting in the death of hundreds of thousands of people. On the island of Java alone, 100,000 lives succumbed to the disease. Cholera studies by R. Politzer, MD, in 1954 suggest that cholera never fully disappeared, as it only took dives in infection rate during the winter seasons, in which people would come out of their homes less. He also infers that this led to each resurgence of the disease over the course of history. The next stop in our journey takes us to the 1918 H1N1 influenza virus, what you know as the Spanish flu. It infected a third of the world's population and killed more than 50 million people across the planet. This pandemic did not, as many people believe, originate in Spain. The Spanish flu began its rise in the later years of World War I. As wars would have it, and governments too, censorship was prevalent as nations fought to maintain morale. However, the press in neutral Spain were free to publish reports of the illness, which resulted in people falsely believing that the disease was specific only to Spain. One of the first registered cases was that of Albert Gitchell, a US Army cook at a military base in Kansas, who was hospitalized with a 40°C fever. The virus spread quickly through the base, which housed about 54,000 troops at the time. By the end of the month, 1,100 troops had been hospitalized and 38 had died after developing pneumonia. The virus which the US troops were carrying as they headed to Europe for war was far more deadly than the guns they had in their hands. According to James Harris, a historian at Ohio State University, the rapid movement of soldiers around the globe was the main reason for the spread of the disease. Harris believes public health officials who were unwilling to impose quarantines during wartime were the ones to blame for the mass outbreak of the virus. In Britain, for example, a government official named Sir Arthur Newsholme knew full well that a strict civilian lockdown was the best way to fight the spread of the highly contagious virus. But in fear of crippling the war effort, he refused to keep munitions factory workers and other civilians home. This evidently did little to mitigate the spread of the virus. Eventually, cities in the United States began to impose lockdowns and social distancing measures, which led to the end of the Spanish flu in 1920. Fast forward 100 years later, late December 2019 saw the World Health Organization's China office make its first reports of a previously unknown virus. The city of Wuhan became the first major victim to experience the full effects of this virus.
现在绝大部分呢是来自于武汉或者去过武汉，所以现在呢，我的总的看法呢，就是没有特殊的情况呢，是不要去武汉。
What we now officially know as COVID-19, an abbreviated form of coronavirus disease 2019, has truly taken over the world and has affected lives across the globe. Although unconfirmed and mainly just theories, COVID-19 is said to have originated in a wet market in Wuhan, which sold both dead and live animals. But to date, no one has been able to confirm the source of the virus. What we do know is that the virus has an incubation period of up to 14 days. And by now, knowing how the virus spreads should be like knowing your ABCs. According to an article by Nina Solik and Riley D. Champine in the National Geographic, the rise of globalization, urbanization, and larger, more densely populated cities can facilitate a virus's spread across a continent in a matter of hours. Before the world went into a global quarantine, according to FlightRadar24.com, there was an average of 102,000 flights each day across the globe. Each plane can seat a minimum of 150 people. Taking half that number at 75 passengers a plane, that's well over 7 million travelers each day. So how did we go from this amount of cases in Malaysia to this? Malaysian authorities have identified a man, patient 26, as being the spark to our second wave. Plus, an unrelated gathering of 16,000 people with attendees from Thailand, Brunei, and even Singapore. The gathering is now linked to about 62% of positive cases here in Malaysia. Due to the rise in number of cases, the government implemented a movement control order on the 18th of March 2020 as a preventive measure to mitigate the transmission of the virus.
Kerajaan memutuskan untuk melaksanakan perintah kawalan pergerakan.
To enforce this prohibition, all houses of worship, schools, and businesses were to be closed, except those providing essential services like food and groceries. Traveling out of the country or state was also restricted to further restrict not the movements of people, but more the movements of the virus. A brief look at similar events in history indicates that social distancing and self-isolation are definitely key contributors to stopping the spread of a disease. The severe winters of the cholera outbreak ensured people stayed home and self-isolated. The lockdowns implemented during the Spanish flu led to the end of that horrific period. So if you're going to complain about having to stay home, the choice is really simple: your couch or the hospital bed.